In July of 1945, the war in Europe had only recently come to an end. In Britain, it had been 3 years since the Blitz had ended, and there was a great deal of rebuilding to do. In the years following World War II, some areas affected by the Blitz were left untouched for a long time following the initial cleanup effort, and before these areas were excavated and rebuilt upon, they became an everyday part of the scenery within British towns and cities. In May of 1941, the city of Liverpool was targeted by the Luftwaffe. Although this wasn't the first German air raid on the city, it was the most devastating. In an attack that spanned 9 days, large areas of the city were decimated. One of those areas was here on the corner of Fulford Street and Great Homer Street. Like other parts of the city, it had suffered great damage and buildings were razed to the ground. But by 1945, the people had begun to find some semblance of normality. Life went on, and the people of Liverpool made use of the wasteland, especially the children who played there almost daily in the summer months. It was the 13th of July, and for the past couple of weeks, the local children had been seen rolling a 7-foot-long, 20-inch wide metal cylinder around this wasteland and surrounding roads. It was rolled from place to place, kicked and climbed on, and when the children got bored of it, the adults in the neighbourhood would use the object as a place to sit and talk. At around 11:30 a.m, 3 boys were playing on the bomb site. One curious young man, 9-year-old Thomas Lawson, hid behind the cylinder during a game of hide-and-seek. That's when he saw something he hadn't noticed before. Part of an elastic-sided boot was protruding from the partially compressed end of the cylinder. The curious boy pulled out the shoe and saw, gleaming in the shade of the cobwebbed canister, the bones of a human leg. Police Constable Robert Bailey, who was just metres away at the Kirkdale Road, Great Homer Street junction, found himself surrounded by a group of terrified children. After Tommy Lawson told Bailey what he had found, the canister was seized and sent to the city mortuary. When scrutinised, police could see that one end of the object was covered by a metal disc that had been bolted to the inside. The other end, from where the foot was protruding, had been partially caved in, leaving an approximate 4-inch gap. Once at the morgue, it was cut open. According to journalist Bill Rogers, the contents brought startled gasps from those who were present. What they saw was the fully clothed skeletal remains of a person, soon found to be a male. Detective Inspector John William Morris and Chief Superintendent A.W. Fothergill, who headed the investigation, believed that the cylinder could have been left there by thieves who had stolen a hoard of scrap metal from a yard somewhere and, on discovery of the skeleton, dumped it on the Great Homer Street site. However, this completely went against what so many local people claimed. While some said that they had only seen the object in the area recently, most agreed that it had been there for many years. Local man Norman Garner of 278 Great Homer Street was sure that he had seen the cylinder in the area in one position or another since the Liverpool Blitz. He said that it was likely part of the debris from a house that had been destroyed. He had taken particular notice of it recently because he had seen the young boys roll it over from Candia Street, which was at the time directly across the road from the Great Homer Street Blitz site. Mr. Garner then put forward his own theory regarding the man inside. He recalled that, just before the Blitz, a young man from the area by the name of Flood had gone missing and hadn't been seen since. He believed that the man in the cylinder was Mr. Flood, who had probably found shelter within the cylinder at the time of the Blitz and perished inside. The object was a heavy metal and looked like a ventilation shaft. The compressed open end suggested that the man may have taken shelter during an air raid, and once the opening was damaged, it was impossible for him to escape. So that was the most accepted theory. A man, possibly young Mr. Flood, who had been missing since the German air raids, had crawled into the tight space for shelter and perished. And the initial medical records supported this. On the 17th of July, the Liverpool Echo reported that they had it on good authority that the man had died 3 to 4 years prior. As the grotesque form lay on the table at the morgue, The coroner, detective and others who were present pondered over the existing theory that the man had died during recent wartime. There were two glaring issues though, which meant that they could not be completely satisfied with that theory. Apart from the advanced decomposition, the clothes were clearly much older than a few years. He wore a bow tie and a suit from the mid to late 19th century, and his shoes were in a style long outdated. Journalist Bill Rogers wrote, "Here was the skeleton of a man, dressed in Victorian clothing, edged with braid and cloth-covered buttons." Inside the suit were several items. There were 7 heavily corroded keys, a plain handkerchief, and a rusted spatula. On his hand was a 15-carat signet ring with a green stone flecked with red. It had the hallmark London 1859. Inside the cylinder with the skeleton was some Hessian sack and a brick wrapped in the same style sack. It looked as if this could have been bedding and a makeshift pillow. Experienced coroner G.C. Mort referred to the opinions of 2 experts before being able to make a final decision regarding the cause of death at an inquest. On July the 20th, 1945, Dr. Charles Victor Harrison, a senior lecturer in pathology at Liverpool University, presented his findings. He believed that the man was between 25 years and middle age, and that he had probably died around 10 years ago because of the presence of moisture. But he added that if the cylinder had been airtight most of the time, then the normal drying out process would have been slowed. If that was the case, then it was possible that the man could have died during the 1880s, some 60 years ago. This would support the theory that the man was from the Victorian era. Dr. J.B. Firth of the Home Office Laboratory in Preston carried out his own post-mortem. He said that the man was 6 foot tall and had been between 30 and 50 years old when he died. He mentioned in his report that the head had been detached and the skull had broken in the region of the left ear, but added that there was no reason to think that this was caused by a violent act. This made me question the sack-wrapped brick inside the cylinder. If children had been rolling the canister around, wouldn't the brick naturally cause damage to the skeleton? This was never mentioned in the sources I read as a possibility, but Dr. Firth did say that the brick hadn't been in the cylinder for as long as the body had, which was interesting considering that the brick was originally thought to have formed part of the man's bed. Dr. Firth added that there was some hair still attached to the cranium and the left base of the skull was missing. At the Home Office Laboratory, where Dr. Firth was based, faded documents found inside the man's clothing were scrutinised under ultraviolet light. There was a postcard postmarked Birmingham. It was dated the 3rd of July 1885 and addressed to T.C. Williams from Mr. A.E. Harris. There was a London North Western Railway ticket dated the 27th of June 1885, 2 diaries from 1884 and 1885 respectively. One of those diaries had an entry dated June 1885. It was for a meeting at 1 p.m. with F.C. Grady at Cons. I thought that maybe this meant Conservative Club, but then I realised that the Association of Conservative Clubs wasn't formed until 1894. There was a flyer advertising the services of a paint and varnish manufacturer called T.C. Williams & Co., and account sheets relating to the same company. It was thought that the rusted spatula found in the dead man's pocket could be related to the business, because it was the kind used to mix paint. Detectives found that the company was once based at numbers 18 to 20 Leeds Street, Liverpool, and was in operation up until 1884. Although there are other reports that state the business operated from number 5 Leeds Street, not 18 to 20. Either way, it was discovered that in the same year, the financial affairs of the proprietor, Thomas Cragene Williams, were being scrutinised by a firm of accountants, but no official bankruptcy was ever recorded. In March of 1884, the London Gazette newspaper printed a request for Thomas Williams to provide details of his finances no later than the 22nd of March that year. After receiving no response, the newspaper printed a similar notice 18 months later in September of 1885. On the back of this evidence, a theory emerged that this could be the body of Thomas Cregeen Williams himself, and that after facing financial ruin, he had either ended his life or died while he was in hiding. It was common at the time, or so I've read, that to escape bankruptcy, people would sometimes go missing, usually hiding out of sight or even jumping on a ship and heading overseas to avoid their creditors. If the dead man was Thomas Williams, maybe it was accepted by everyone who knew him that this was what he had done, when in fact he had taken his own life or died of asphyxiation after crawling into the canister to sleep. Murder was another theory, but due to the extent of the decomposition, it was impossible to tell. No traces of poison were found either. It was expressed in a 1955 retrospective article by Richard Whittington Egan that it was likely that the man had taken his own life, but Whittington Egan added that, in charity, we must not entirely dismiss the possibility of accident. It also came to light that Thomas Williams had a son, also named Thomas, born in 1859, which would have made him 26 in 1885. But Dr. Firth was steadfast in his belief that the man was at least 30 years old when he died, and said that it could not be his son. There was still the matter of the metal object the skeleton was found in. Police initially thought that maybe it formed part of a Victorian ventilation system or dust extraction apparatus for a paint factory, certainly something Thomas Williams, a man in that business, would have access to. Dr. Firth concluded that the cylinder was part of a Victorian ventilation system, but there were no traces of paint or varnish, so had nothing to do with the business owned by Williams. The inquest was opened and adjourned 3 times due to the unclear nature of the case. In the end, on Friday the 31st of August 1945, Coroner G.C. Mort recorded an open verdict, as it was impossible to ascertain how the man had died. Also, despite the strong evidence that the man was Thomas Cregeen Williams, there was no way of knowing that for sure. Therefore, the final verdict was read as unknown man, whose death occurred on or about July the 4th, 1885. There was a search for family members, followed by an appeal for relatives to come forward, but these came to nothing. Among all the circumstantial evidence available, there is one thing, probably above all, that points to the man in the cylinder being Thomas Williams, and that is that no one could find any record of his death or burial in any cemetery or graveyard in the country. He had lived with his wife Elizabeth on Prospect Vale, Fairfield. They later moved to Clifton Road, Anfield. Elizabeth died at the Clifton Road address in May of 1878. Following her death, Thomas Williams had spent some time living on Cambridge Road in Seaforth and Abbotsford Road in Crosby. In the office at Anfield Cemetery, where they kept the receipts people signed when they received the deeds of a grave, there is one dated December the 21st, 1878. Scrawled in brown faded ink is the name Thomas Cregeen Williams. In August of 1945, a man named William Pemberton, who was the caretaker of a nearby Methodist church, came forward to say that he'd seen exactly where the strange-looking canister had come from because he had been there when it was first exposed. He said that in the summer of 1943, 2 years after the Liverpool Blitz, he saw American soldiers clearing debris from the destroyed houses to the back of the Methodist church on Boundary Street. During that cleanup, he saw the cylinder emerge from a house and watched as it was pushed around by a bulldozer before being partially crushed by its blade. Mr. Pemberton said, "This is clearly what caused the damage to the canister that sealed one end." Then it just became part of the scenery until the local boys found it. Over the course of their investigation, police received many letters from hopefuls who had relatives that were missing. These varied from a young man who lost his father on the HMS Amazon after it burned and sank in 1852, to a man whose son disappeared in 1901 on the day of Queen Victoria's death. There was another letter, however, that piqued police interest. It was from an 80-year-old man who had once lived on Leeds Street, where Thomas Williams once ran his paint and varnish business. He said that he had read in the papers about the green and red signet ring found on the skeleton. He recalled that when he was a young boy, he would tease Mr. Williams by opening the door to his business and trigger the old-fashioned spring bell he had behind the door. He did this daily on his way back from school, until one day an angry Thomas Williams caught him and slapped him across the ears. He said he'd never forgotten the heavy signet ring which he had seen and felt during what he called a well-earned punishment. On October 26, 1976, a theory was put forward in the Liverpool Echo. It was regarding Member of Parliament Victor Grayson, who went missing in 1920. The theory was put forward by one S. Gordon of Warrington. They said that the circumstantial evidence presented in 1945 was weak and relied greatly on supposition. They questioned whether the police at the time, when looking at the dead man's clothes, had mistaken late Edwardian clothing for Victorian. They go on to say that Victor Grayson was originally from Liverpool, and at the time of his disappearance in 1920, his mother lived near Prince's Avenue, which was less than 3 miles south of where the body was found. Although it's reported that Grayson was last seen in London on the 28th of September drinking with friends, there are other reports that say he was at his mother's house in Liverpool at the tail end of September 1920. Either way, the official story says that when Grayson left his friends that day in London, he was never seen again. It's believed that he was either murdered to prevent him revealing evidence of corruption in the British Liberal government, or he was bribed to keep quiet and lived out the rest of his life under another name. As interesting as the Victor Grayson theory is, it fails to explain the paperwork found in the suit of the dead man, which was all dated 35 years before Grayson's disappearance. The site where the canister was found by young Thomas Lawson in 1945 on the corner of Fulford Street and Great Homer Street is roughly where Marwood Towers stands today. Candia Street, where Norman Garner said he saw the object before it was rolled over to the corner of Great Homer Street, no longer exists. That location was roughly where the Thomaston Street cul-de-sac is today. Boundary Street, where William Pemberton, the church caretaker, saw the cylinder being unearthed by the American soldiers in 1943, is still there. This is most likely where the house that the mystery man was in once stood. The next street on, Nursery Street, is gone, and neighbouring Skirving Street is now connected to Boundary Street via Skirving Place.